locomotive, sipping, drinking Arizona. Mixtape just around the corner, did a lot in California. Can't wait to drop this on you. Yeah, they gon' have fun with that. Smash like Songam and my songs gon'
Welcome everyone, I'm Tim Haraney. You're listening to the TSN Racing Pod and the Scuderia F1 Pod Sunday Austrian Grand Prix review. If you want more from me, you can get me on social media at Tim Haraney. Joining me today is the man himself, Mr. Mark Daly from Scuderia F1 Pod. If you want more from them, you can get them at Scuderia F1 Pod on Twitter. Mark, what's happening, man? How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm just enjoying, I'm reveling in this really exciting Grand Prix that we saw on Sunday because, man, was there a lot of action. And I thought after Friday, after Saturday, I just almost expected that Max was going to get the hat trick and win the race as well. And it didn't turn out that way. And it was so unpredictable. Pardon me. I'm tripping over my words. I'm still so excited here. But it was a lot of fun, man. I think that this was probably the best indication or the best, what do you even want to call it, result that we've had for like the new cars this year, because that was crazy, especially going up into that hill into turn 3. Not only did we see 2 abreast, sometimes 3 abreast, sometimes we saw 5 cars going into that turn. It was awesome, man. It was great.
Yeah, going into turn 1, right, Mark? There was like 3 wide at one time, and then heading up into T3, there was 4 wide at one point with I'm trying to remember who all was involved there. It was Magnussen. I'm going to get this wrong. Magnussen, Schumacher, Ocon, and Norris or Stroll. I can't remember.
Lance was in there as well, but there were so many there are so many instances of that on Sunday that the fact that we're sitting here after the fact, struggling to remember who was involved at one point, was really a testament of how good the action on the track was. Because I remember at one point, I think it was K-Mag and Fernando, and maybe was it Yuki going into turn 1, but it was crazy going into turn 1. I can't even remember who it was now, but where you went into that corner didn't necessarily mean you were going to be in the same position coming out of turn 1, going up the straight and towards turn 2. That's how crazy it was, but it was great. I mean, we did see some, we saw Pierre getting a 5-second penalty for causing a collision with Sebastian. We saw George getting a 5-second time penalty for causing that collision with Sergio on lap 1. But apart from that, I mean, it was just good, hard racing all day long, and it was fantastic. I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, enjoyed that. Enjoyed the Formula 2 race with Logan Sargent coming home, American Logan Sargent, winning the Formula 2 race on Sunday, feature race. And then the Formula 3 race was awesome too. I mean, there was just so much good racing going on this weekend at the Austrian Grand Prix. Mark, where do you want to start with this one? You want to go qualifying first?
Well, let's just maybe set it up a little bit. We can talk about, let's just give out the top 10 in the classification and then just the update in the World Championship, because that's kind of, I wouldn't say it's kind of giving away the end of the story before we tell the story. But if we kind of maybe leave it to the end, there's so much ground to kind of cover in between. So let's just start there. So we had Charles Leclerc for Ferrari redeeming himself, getting back up on the horse, winning this one, passing Max Verstappen not once, not twice, but 3 times. And having a sticky throttle at the end of the race, managing to hang on, getting the win. Max coming home 3rd. Lewis getting a podium, 2nd race in a row. George Russell 4th for Mercedes. Esteban Ocon, I think that's a pretty good result for Esteban, coming in P5. Mick Schumacher in the points once again in P6. Lando P7, Kevin Magnussen in the second half, P8, Danny Ricciardo P9 for, I was going to say Mercedes, McLaren Mercedes, and then Fernando, despite starting way at the back of the grid, came home in the final points paying position for 10th in the Alpine. And then if you look at the drivers' standings, the 2022 Formula 1 World Championship, Max Verstappen on top, 208 points. Charles Leclerc second with 170 points. Sergio Perez, 151 points. Checo not scoring any points today. Carlos Sainz, 133 points. Carlos not scoring any points today. George Russell, 128 points. And then Lewis, 109 points for 6th in the World Championship. Then quickly on the constructors' side, pardon me, Red Bull, 359. Ferrari, 303. So maybe this thing isn't quite over yet. I mean, that's still a significant gap, but that can close, especially in the constructors. Mercedes 237, McLaren 81, and Alpine 81. So they're tied on points, but fourth and fifth. McLaren go fourth in the championship by virtue of better results. So, having said that, that is the end result of the weekend, but let's dial it back to Friday because this was a sprint weekend, one of what Hammy likes to call one of the majors. So Friday we had qualifying. So let's start there. We'll dial it all the way back in the notes. So what was your take on Friday qualifying? Max, he took pole. We saw what the bizarrest thing, Lewis going off and crashing on a part of a track that we don't typically see too many drivers have an incident. And then, so we had a red flag, the session stopped. And then immediately as they started going, his teammate puts it into the tire barrier, turn 10, right into the beginning of the start finish straight there. Both Mercedes failed to qualify, or they didn't fail to qualify, but they failed to finish Q3. Mm-hmm. It was bizarre. And you had both Haas's qualifying, both Aston Martins out again in Q1. I could go on and on and on, but you jump in here. Let's hear your take on qualifying.
Yeah, I thought qualifying was good. I mean, I think the thing with the sprint races being held on the Saturday, it kind of really jumbles things up, right, Daly? So, yes. Friday's qualifying can at some points be pretty unpredictable, and it makes up, I think, for the sprint races because right now the sprint races just aren't exciting. They're not at the moment, and hoping that they begin to get exciting once we get a little more, I would say, convergence, because at the end of the day, 20 laps, 23 laps, whatever it was, it's still not enough. It's not enough for these cars and the type of tires that they're actually running to get the right amount of heat into the tire, but also to get the right amount of degradation that I think Pirelli may want to have a spicy sprint race. So that being said, qualifying is always pretty decent. And I honestly thought Charles Leclerc was going to be on pole, man. I don't know where Max Verstappen got the time in that final sector, dude. Honestly, he was yellow in sectors 1 and 2 and somehow still managed to get pole position. I couldn't believe it. I honestly thought it was going to be Charles Leclerc for sure. That for me was a very big surprise. And yes, Hamilton throwing it into the wall was a surprise as well, because he doesn't normally crash.
No, he just doesn't.
He's a very clean driver, right? He always brings the car back in one piece. He's a steady set of hands. And same goes for George Russell as well. I mean, the only really big crash that I can remember from George was when he and Valtteri Bottas came together in Imola last season. Yeah. And outside of that, I don't really remember George having any other massive crashes. Not to say that the crash in Austria was massive, but you rarely see mistakes from George as well. And again, a good steady set of hands. But the other surprise for me was Daniel Ricciardo. That was disappointing, I think, for himself as well. Hearing from him afterwards, he doesn't know what's going on here. Like 16th fastest in qualifying is just not good enough. I mean, given the fact that Lando was P15, but if Lando doesn't have those brake issues and the issues that he had in free practice 1, honestly, Lando's going to qualify a lot higher than P15, Daly.
Sure. Yeah, I thought it was interesting too, because at the end of Q1 there, they put the radio comms up on the TV feed there. And you hear Danny Rick's engineer say something like, okay, Daniel, that's P16, and just bring it back to the pits. And just I don't even know how to describe the tone of voice he had. It was
depressing.
Like, it was depressing. Yeah, he was just kind of like, yep.
Sad. I think, I don't know. Like, I'm not going to tell everyone what Daniel Ricciardo's mental state was, but he just didn't. He didn't sound good. Like, it didn't sound like the regular Daniel Ricciardo we all know. Yeah, he's definitely having some struggles with this car at the moment, Daly. And I think even Lando is somewhat surprised by it as well.
Well, it's interesting too because I think Andreas Seidel, team principal of McLaren, said that the team has to shoulder a little bit of responsibility for some of the issues that Danny's having. But it's I don't know where the trade-off is. I mean, you have like Zach about a month ago or 6 weeks ago saying that this it's been disappointing for us, it's been disappointing for him, and then it just hasn't lived up to anybody's expectations. And you hear Andreas saying these things, and you can tell that Danny's frustrated. And I mean, when you look at like his Q1 time, he records a 106.613. Lando's Q1 time was a 106.330. So it's about a quarter of a second. So it's not huge, but it's big enough. And it's just the mental thing. It's like, oh, damn, I'm slower than my teammate again. He just squeaks into Q2 by the skin of his teeth. And, I don't. It just mentally, that just has to wear on you over and over and over and over again. But at the end of the day, I mean, it was a pretty decent result for them by the time it was all said and done. They're both home in the points. Ricardo is in ninth, and then Lando's in seventh. Again, he's behind his teammates, but at least he's in the points by the time it's over. So I think you take something out of it.
I think so. And the other surprise was both Aston Martin cars being out in Q1 as well. Good, race pace. I mean, Lance was good in the sprint race. He was solid in the Grand Prix as well. We'll get into that a little bit later, but I think for them still trying to figure out the car itself, Lance had made mention that, they're still missing a lot of downforce with this car. Same with mechanical grip as well. That's still a bit of an issue for them. But if they can get it all sorted, I really do think they have a decent car here, but I think it's just trying to get the mileage under the belt with it daily, just so they can get comfortable. Because you have to remember, it's practically a brand new car.
Well,
right?
Well, that's the thing, right? It's every time I see this car, it just is every time I have a little bit of hope that Aston Martin seem to be putting it together, that there's flashes that there's something with this car, then it seems like they have a setback or two. And it just, to me, it just kind of says, this is a team that is still struggling to figure out what the problem is and how to work around it and to get a little bit more consistency, because that's what it is. This car is lacking consistency, because I don't think there's any question about that Sebastian's a good driver. I think that Lance has matured nicely as a driver. I know a lot of people tend to rip on him, which I think at times can be a little bit unfair. It's just... It's just putting those pieces together in the right order and then get some consistency. And like you say, more importantly, get some miles under their belt, because if this is in effect a brand new car, which it basically is, when they introduced these upgrades, what was it, about a month ago, 6 weeks ago?
They had a biggest, the biggest upgrade came to the car at the British Grand Prix. And that was, that was really... They had the biggest one in Barcelona, and then they had another big one at the British Grand Prix, and then they brought some more bits and pieces to the car for this weekend as well. So it always seems to be they're bringing something new to the car, but at the end of the day, I mean, they still are like I said, they're still just lacking downforce, lacking that mechanical grip. Haas. Looking really good. Really good. No upgrades for them. Not yet. Not until France. And that car is still competitive. So if these upgrades come to the car for France, I mean, and they don't work, then they can just revert back to this car, because it's a solid race car. Both K-Mag and Mick qualifying P6, P7 for that sprint race. Really solid job by both. And same for Mick. I mean, I think him scoring points last time out, that just shows you he's got that confidence, right? And that's one of the things that we always talk about with these drivers, Mark, is this: once you kind of get that confidence, once you kind of get that key result, everything else just seems to really just fit into place.
Well, totally. I mean, not only does he qualify well, like you mentioned, but in the sprint race, K-Mag finishes seventh. Mick Schumacher finishes in ninth in the sprint race, and by the time it's over again, they're in the points. I mean, I think this is great. I mean, MSE P6, K-Mag in eighth. I mean, they went through a bit of a dry spell there over like the last several races. And then it was funny today, like during the race itself. I mean, Lewis was just saying like I can't remember his exact words, but it was something to the effect of the straight line speed that these guys have is unbelievable, because the longest, I mean, you get those two very long straight sections where you come into turn one, that little flick, that little dog leg at turn two, and then that long run down between turns 3 and 4. So, I mean, Lewis just, I guess that's something that really sort of speaks to, what they have at the back of the car, that Ferrari powers for real. And also that the car that they put it into, this Haas, like you say, it's a good car. And it's good to see them putting it together. And Mick, I was starting to get a little bit worried about him because, I mean, obviously he has the Schumacher name. I mean, his dad's 7-time world champion. I mean, Ralph Schumacher was no pushover either. I mean, he won several Grand Prix in his career. Obviously, nowhere near as successful as his brother, but I mean, he was no slouch in Formula One either. I mean, he was a decent driver. So I mean, there's a lot for Mick to live up to, and it's just great to see him scoring some points in the last couple of races.
Yeah, let's talk about that sprint race because like I mentioned, I honestly not a huge fan of these sprint races at the moment. I'm hoping that we finally get some really exciting ones that kind of turn things around. Frankly, I don't think they're long enough, but I don't think they're using the right tire either. So Max Verstappen getting the victory. My biggest takeaway from this sprint race is that Charles Leclerc should have been the one winning this race, and Charles Leclerc, I think, could have won this race because I feel like he was the faster driver. It's just the fighting between him and Carlos Sainz off the hop that just puts this thing away quickly, right? Because once you kind of break that DRS like Max did, then it's kind of already over because it takes you so much longer, so much energy to claw back into the deficit that you've just lost to your rival because of that. And so now you kind of got to claw your way back into it. And you know what? I think if Carlos doesn't fight Charles Leclerc off the top, I think Leclerc wins this. And this is where another conversation comes in to the point where, okay, when does the team starts telling Carlos no towards things? And it was an interesting topic because it was brought up in the one of our press conferences that we were on. And the conversation based around like, okay, well, when do you tell a driver when they are going to be number one and the other one's going to be number two? And the team principals were like, well, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't, right? Like
sure,
fans get mad at you if there's no racing between the two drivers. But then when you try to like rein the two drivers in, then the fans get mad because there's no racing. So
yeah, I know, right? But it's kind of funny because it seems that for whatever reason, this is not new to Ferrari this year. I mean, even dial it back for a couple of years ago when it was Sebastian and Charles. Yeah. Exactly. I mean, you would just think just by virtue of seniority that Sebastian would be the number one driver. I mean, that's the way it would have been in the old days. I mean, I guess that makes the case for, well, if you want to be number one, go out and prove me wrong. Mm-hmm. And I guess Charles, by and large, did that fairly quickly way back in 2019. But this is a little bit different now. It's not like the upcomer against the grizzled old vet. I mean, these are two guys of a similar kind of age, and Charles, he doesn't have like 20 or 30 Grand Prix under his belt. He hasn't won a world championship. That's not to say that he won't in his career, but I mean, just at least on paper, there isn't a lot separating Charles and Carlos. I mean, Charles, when you look at it on the track, I mean, he is a little bit faster, but I guess that you could make the argument, well, last week at Silverstone, Carlos was the better driver, but it's how do you want to twist that story around? But I think, that goes back to your original comments. When you're the team principal, it's like, where do you jump in? And I don't know what it exactly is with Mattia Binotto and Ferrari, if they want to, or they just are they just kind of like letting these guys kind of like go at it and see, letting them fight and kind of like establish that natural order, or I mean, I don't. Sorry,
Yeah, finish your thought.
I was just gonna say, I can't see this one going down the lines of like Hamilton and Rosberg, but who knows, right?
Yeah, I don't see it going that far either. But do you remember when Barrichello moved over for Schumacher?
Oh yeah, like what was it, like in 2003 or 2002 or whatever it was?
Yeah, it was one of those years.
Yeah,
Matteo Binotto brought it up in one of the press conferences over the weekend, and he kind of just said, he's like, I was there for that day, and all the fans were extremely upset and were booing and all this other kind of stuff because they were so upset that Rubens like moved over to let Michael by to get the win at this very track. So the thing is that Matteo has been through all this. Like, he's seen it all. He's been a part of Ferrari forever, but he's also seen the number one driver and number two driver. And I don't know if in his mind that's something that he doesn't agree with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it kind of makes you wonder. Yeah, totally. Because I think at heart, I mean, even though he's the team principal, he just strikes me as like an engineer. Like, I think he thinks in numbers and probabilities and if then else and all these different things. I mean, let's face it. I mean, on Sunday, Charles was driving like a man possessed. I mean, right from the get-go all the way through the race. I mean, it just looked like he had something to prove. I mean, Carlos, right until his car let go on him right at the very end, was it lap 5 or 6 from the end, whatever it was, lap 56, whatever it was. But he was having a good afternoon as well. And I'm just kind of wondering, in Mattia's mind, is there some, like, I'm sure that there's some cutoff point where he will step in, but I think at the moment, I think he's kind of content to let them kind of sort it out. But certainly when it comes to what Charles did on the track on Sunday, it maybe makes that sort of natural, I guess, determination, the self-determination, whatever you want to call it, of the two drivers sorting it out. I think that Charles made a good statement, regardless if Carlos was going to finish that race or not.
Yeah, you see, Christian Horner and Toto Wolff, they'll make those calls, right? They'll make the calls where they say, all right, Valtteri, you're number 2, Lewis, you're number 1, right?
Or the famous wingman comment that he made in Russia a couple of years ago for Valtteri.
But that's the thing, right? With those team principals, they'll let you know straight up. Where at Ferrari, we're still searching. We're still trying to figure out, all right, who's number 1, who's number 2? Where this is it should already be a given that Charles Leclerc is now number 1. I would say if this were, I don't know, 3 races in and this is where we're at, then I would say, yeah, all right, well, season's early. And that's what it takes, I think, for that number 1 driver to really appear. It's who's going to take advantage and control first. And that's the thing about having teammates and being a teammate as well. You also need to understand that you have to jump out to a lead so that you're the one who's determining who gets the calls, who gets the parts, who gets this, who gets that, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And Charles Leclerc's done that. He's done a really great job. Like last season, I felt that Carlos Sainz was the guy at Ferrari last season, and this season it's Charles Leclerc. All right. And in this race itself, he really put his stamp on it. If he hadn't have had the throttle pedal issues, like he had said that he gave a percentage, but I don't think he was right on with the percentage, because we asked him about it later and he still wasn't like, he's like, oh yeah, I'm not sure if it was 20 or 30%. It might not have been that high, kind of thing. So, but that being said, he still had the throttle pedal stuck open daily, and that's still impossible for a driver to really extract performance from the car. I mean, you're braking and still driving into a corner at the same time. It's kind of a scary feeling. But for him to still control the race and to get the win, even though Max was coming there at the end, it's great. I think that he would probably want some more points out of that championship because Max did get away pretty easy this weekend.
Yeah, he did. There's no doubt about it. And you have to tip your hat to Charles Leclerc because, I mean, that couldn't have been an easy 5 or 6 laps at the end. And if that issue had manifested 5 or 6 laps earlier, if it came out at maybe lap 60 or lap 55, then maybe we're talking about a completely different outcome to this race, because I just got this real sinking feeling, like after watching Carlos just on that straightaway between turns 3 and 4, just all of a sudden you saw that little puff of smoke come out the back of the car, and then it's like, oh my goodness, here we go again. The Tifosi are going to be losing their mind. He sort of coasts off the track, and then a couple of laps later, after the VSC is ended and they go back to racing, and then Charles is complaining about this. I'm like, yeah, they got a good car there, but it really seems to be made out of glass. I mean, you look at Charles. I mean, he's got 2 DNFs this season. Carlos has 4 now, and it's so frustrating. I mean, if you go all the way back to Spain, Carlos. Well, if you go back to Miami, he was on the podium there. He had a 4th in Spain, a 2nd at Monaco, that he retired in Azerbaijan, 2nd in Canada, wins at Silverstone last weekend. And I mean, Charles, I mean, he's been up and down ever since he got that P2 at Miami, and then he had a couple of DNFs, and then he was in the top 5 a couple of times. So he really needed this race today. And I was really watching those last 3 or 4 laps. I really thought it was really intriguing because Max, I think he had one real big push with about 2 laps to go, and it was just clear that Charles had the pace all afternoon long. But I think Max saw a bit of weakness and then just thought, well, if anything's going to happen, I got to push now, or else it's not going to happen. I mean, I don't think he got closer than maybe about a second. I think it was about a second and a half or 2 seconds. Not quite close enough. Not even close enough to really try and put a move on Charles. But it just goes to show you like how good of a driver Charles is to deal with that situation, manage the car, and still be able to hold Max at arm's length through those last several laps of the race, eh?
Yeah, I'm just not only dealing with that, and dealing with all of the other things that he had coming into the weekend as well. He'd let us know that Matteo Binotto came to Monaco to have dinner with him and to try and smooth things over from the British Grand Prix. And then there was some reports coming out of Italian press about how that his side of the garage, didn't want to be in the team photo with Carlos Sainz after the British Grand Prix, which turns out to be a false story. And on top of all that, Leclerc's issues, that he's had since the Australian Grand Prix. And I said something similar on SportsCenter, but I'll say it again here. I mean, what was DNF in Spain, right? Yeah, the Monaco strategic Ferrari blunder that costed him a win there. And you had another DNF in Azerbaijan with an engine. And then you had Canadian Grand Prix, engine change, penalty, started from the rear. And then you got to the British Grand Prix, and well, we all know what happened there. Strategic Ferrari error, in my opinion, costed him another win. So this championship should be a hell of a lot closer than what it is right now. And I think getting this win for him adds to the confidence. You know how we talked about with Schumacher with the confidence? This was just a big win, and you could just see it. Like, you see how he celebrated when he got out of the car. You could just tell, even though it was only like 5 points that he was able to eat into Verstappen's lead, just getting this win here was important to them, and it was important to them as a team, because I think it tells us quite a few things. One, it tells us that they've got a really good car. The upgrades that they've brought are working. The upgrades that they brought are working, especially in the race, because I really feel that they had trouble with the race tire and how the car used the race tire. If you just remember, even just the Miami Grand Prix, it was a disaster for that car in that race. And so I think the car is going in the right direction, and I can see this championship start to become a little bit more track dependent. And, even if Max gets one DNF and Charles gets a win, I mean, Daly, it's game on, man. Game on.
Oh yeah, totally, and I think it was pretty cool as well, just to not only to say or to react to the way that he was excited after winning that race. See him when he got out of the car, hearing him on the radio. This was something that he needed. But you brought up a really good point there, and that was the fact that he only took a very small chunk out of Max's lead. Max has 208 points. Charles has 170, and it was unfortunate because not only did Carlos deserve that P2, he was totally deserving of that, and Ferrari were totally deserving of the 1-2 finish this afternoon. But not only does that engine failure ruin Carlos's afternoon, it also affects Charles because the points that Carlos was taking away from Max got those back. Okay, it wasn't like he was going to take 20 or 30 points out of his lead, but every little bit helps, and that. So I mean, it's kind of a mixed result. I mean, yes, it's a huge confidence booster to him after having this horrible run of luck over the last half dozen races or so. I mean, we still got a couple of races to go here before we hit the summer break in a couple of weeks' time, but finally things are going in the right direction. Okay, it didn't work out for him last week at Silverstone for for reasons we've talked about quite a bit. But his teammate won. I mean, he can probably take some solace away from the fact knowing that the result that he had in Great Britain wasn't down to himself. It was a team call. I think we can agree. They blew the call on the pit wall, and it is what it is. So he should have probably finished better than where he did. But he was amazing today. I think that he has to take a lot away from that. He didn't put a wheel wrong. I mean, the fact that he passed Max 3 times is a real testament. And the first one I think was the most impressive one because I think he really caught Max fast asleep at the wheel going into turn 4 there because Max left the door completely wide open. And Charles, I mean, he was close, but I mean, he really left the braking late, and it was a great move. I mean, Max, fair play to him. He didn't slam the door and maybe Michael Schumacher might have done in the years gone by, really turned in like quite aggressively. I mean, it was well played by both of them. But I mean, that was a really, really opportunistic move from Charles Leclerc. And if you want to be a race winner and ultimately a champion, those are the kind of moves you're going to have to take. Nobody was going to give him that lead. He went and snatched away from Max, and he did it 2 more times before the race was over. I thought it was impressive.
Frustration down at Ferrari just for Carlos Sainz, obviously. Like you had mentioned, drove extremely well, was in line for that P2 for sure, and reliability on the Ferrari strikes again. And I think moving forward, that's going to be a key conversation when it comes to Ferrari. I think there's going to be 2 of them, and it has nothing to do with the performance of the car. I think it has everything to do with the reliability of the car, and I think it has everything to do with the strategic calls coming from behind the pit wall. And that's what I think is going to be the difference in this championship moving forward from this point out, because Ferrari has a very quick car, but the reliability is just not there. I mean, like you said, Sainz with 4 DNFs this season. I mean, 2 of them, I think 2 of them weren't mechanical, right? That was Australia where he flew off the track, and Imola again where he went off track and got stuck in the gravel. So that being said, I mean, this is still a question mark. The reliability, Daly, still the question mark.
Oh, 100%, because, I go back to like last year, Ferrari, I think for me, they had a really good season. They did it quite quietly. Nobody expected them to challenge for races or for championships or anything like that, but they put the nightmare of 2020 behind them, and maybe even that last quarter of a season from 2019 before, that shady investigation and everything that they had after the year was over. But last year, they quietly put together a really good year. Carlos Sainz, for me, was the unsung hero of 2021. I don't think he really got a lot of respect initially at that is for all the guys that changed teams last year. He quietly put together a very, very good year. When we sat down at the end of the year, we reflected back on what was the 2021 Formula One World Championship. I was quietly confident that if you're a Ferrari fan, or if you're Ferrari yourself, you could take a lot away from 2021, because when they introduced those upgrades, I think it was in Russia last year, that really sort of set up a really good, solid, consistent finish to the end of that season. And I think there was a lot of hope and expectation that they would bring it forward into this year.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we were all really surprised the way that things went the first couple of races of the year in Bahrain, in Saudi, in Australia. It was like, okay, Ferrari are back, and they're back big time. And ever since Australia, it's been a bit of a struggle. I mean, obviously, we saw that Max retired in Australia. He also retired at Bahrain, so that at Red Bull were dealing with some of their own problems. But this is nothing new, this reliability thing, because you and I and Hammy, we talked about this probably even a month ago, that they got this Frankenstein of a car going on with all the different parts that they're pulling out and different components they're having to replace, and ultimately that's going to really affect any kind of challenge that Charles is ultimately going to make in the championship this year, because at some point you just have to expect he's going to be taking penalties, just because that's the way it is.
Mm-hmm. And, Sainz not the only one with frustration on Sunday. Sergio Perez obviously making contact with George Russell, and them just deciding to end Perez's race, bring it in, just save some mileage on that engine, just because he wasn't getting any performance out of the car because of the damage done to it. This is actually an interesting topic that I wanted to bring up, because it has a lot to do with the race directorship off track. So there's been a lot going on behind the scenes that maybe not a lot of people really know about when it comes to the race directorship. So if we go back to when Michael Massey used to run the show, and then obviously he loses his job, and they bring in Niels Vidic and Eduardo Freitas to be the two race directors. So instead of having one race director, now all of a sudden Formula One has two separate ones who do it at different times throughout the season. The problem with all of this, and that the drivers have, is the inconsistency of the calls on track. Who gets a penalty? Why are they getting a penalty? How hard can they race? So if we look at like North American sports, so you have your NBA, NHL, NFL, you have referees, and referees differ from game to game.
Sure.
Inside all of that, the players get an understanding of how they can play, right? Who the referees are, and usually in the first quarter or first period, the players will understand, okay, I can push the boundaries here, I can't over here because they're going to call something here and they're going to do something over here, so I can't do that. With racing, you don't have those opportunities. As soon as you've done something you'd be penalized for, you're penalized. And as soon as you're penalized, your race is pretty much over, right? You're either getting a 5-second time penalty, you're getting a stop and go, a 10-second, whatever. And it's pretty much over. So you can't really push those boundaries on track and also with the race directors, because you just don't know where it is. Lewis Hamilton made mention of it to us on Thursday when we sat down with him for his media press conference interview. And he just said, hey, look, there's too much gray area. It's not black and white. Way too much gray area. Then Friday night, Sebastian Vettel has a blowout at the drivers' meeting. And a big part of him being so upset, and from my understanding, is because of what went down at the British Grand Prix in terms of the on-track passing, drivers leaving the track, gaining an advantage, and nothing really being done about it. And so Vettel stood up, leaves the thing. Later, he comes back and he eventually apologizes, and that's why the stewards gave him a suspended €25,000 fine. But when Sebastian Vettel, who is basically he's one of the heads of your GPDA, right, Mark? Like when you have a driver like that, and I think for the most part, Seb's pretty cool, calm, and collected, losing his stuff, marching out of a driver's meeting, which you can't leave, by the way, marching out of it, something is just not right. And the drivers want some action taken. So I'm going to be very interested to see moving forward what the FIA decides to do in terms of the race directorship. Are they going to have one? Are they going to have two? How are they going to handle all that? And when we look at the race today, the consistency was, for me, the consistency was there, right?
Yeah.
Every driver got a certain number of warnings for going off track before they got 5-second time penalty. Both George Russell and Pierre Gasly got 5-second time penalties for the exact same move. So clear as day. And so I think this is an interesting conversation in terms of what's going to happen with the race directors.
Yeah, totally. Because dial it back to this time last year we had two races at the Red Bull Ring last year with the Styrian Grand Prix and the Austrian Grand Prix. And I can't remember. I think it was it after the second one? There was a lot of debate because of just the inconsistent application of the track limits. So I could see why, like, I don't know what it would have taken Sebastian Vettel to blow up the way that he did, because I totally agree with you that that Seb seems like one of these guys that he seems to have like a pretty level head on his shoulders, and it seems like it would take a lot to really get him to explode like that and get really upset. But today during the race, it was pretty clear right from the beginning that it was track limits. This is your second warning. Next one's going to be a black and white flag, and then, like you say, a couple of guys were hit with the time penalties. But I thought it was good, because last year I thought that it really left an impression that it made Formula One look a little bush league, because it was really inconsistent the way that they were calling that track limits, because it's either, you're either within the two white lines on the edge of the track or you're not. And if you're going to call one instance of it, you should be calling all of them. It's not some sort of arbitrary decision. It either is or it isn't. So, but more to your point, the fact that they have the two race directors now, it's just like, where's the inconsistency coming from? Is it the fact that one of them is a little bit more by the book, and is the other one that, the term is, well, he's going to let them play. That's the one phrase that you'll hear when in a basketball game or a football game, hockey game, whatever. Is it and don't get me wrong, I don't think it's a bad thing to have a couple of different people involved. I think there's maybe a little bit more accountability. Not that I know that Massey obviously became this very polarizing and controversial figure because of what happened at Yas Marina at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix back in last December, but yeah, I don't know. It's just I think that the more people you have involved, I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing. It's just there has to be some sort of minimum standard. It's just like one guy can't be wildly calling it one way or the other. It's either, you have this minimum standard or you don't. It's just like, oh, we know that it's Mr. X is showing up this week, so we know that we could be pushing track limits or whatever it might be, because they were checking everything. The one thing that I saw that at the end of the race I've never seen in all my years watching Formula One was the stewards had noticed that Pierre's 5-second time penalty, that there was potentially in an infringement, which to me is, well, did he take off after 4.8 seconds or whatever it was? Ultimately, I think they looked into it. It was okay, but I'd never seen anything like that before. I mean, every time I've seen a driver get a time penalty, he goes in and that's, serves his penalty, and that's it. So I don't know what you made about that, but that I thought was very, very interesting.
Yeah, and then also with the physio trainers at in Parc Fermé, which caused the top three to be pulled into the steward's office. So the FIA had kind of warned the drivers about this, saying that they didn't really appreciate the drivers' trainers getting into Parc Fermé and getting to the drivers before they go and get weighed. They did not like that whatsoever, and they had specifically told them not to do it, and they did it anyways. And then they all got pulled in, and then they got a suspended $10,000 euro fine. All three of them. So Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, and Lewis Hamilton. The FIA this weekend was on it, I would say, in terms of like handing out the penalties, or keeping you apprised of what's going on. Like, I've never had. So the FIA sends us documentation on, hey, this is who we're bringing into the stewards. This is why we're bringing into the stewards. This is the breach, alleged breach. This is the sporting code regulation. This is the number. If you want to go look it up, here it is. And they kind of explain it all to you so you can kind of get it out to the public and explain it to them what's going on. I've never had so many of those emails come into my inbox ever. There was so many of them, dude. I was just like rifling through them. I'm like, oh my God, like there's so many in here. Like I'd wake up some mornings at 6 a.m. and be like, oh my God, nothing's even started yet. What is going on here? Like looking through them, like, but this guy changed this. This guy started from pit lane because of this. This is this. Da, 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 da. I'm just like, oh my God, 5-second time penalty here. I've never gotten so many of those things ever. It was wild.
Don't get me wrong. I'm not for overregulation of the sport by any mean. Like I don't want it to be so strict that anybody's afraid to go out there and do anything because they're going to be afraid that the incident will be noted or investigated or they're going to get slapped with something. That's obviously not a bad thing as well. But on the flip side, to borrow that old phrase, you don't want the inmates taking over the asylum either. I mean, we want to see good, hard racing, but at the end of the day, we don't want to see like, inconsistent application of the rules and the regulations. They're there for a reason as well.
Yeah. And the thing is like, if we take a look at like, I'm okay with the racing that went down at the British Grand Prix. Sure. I'm okay. I'm okay with that. Like that, to me, that was, was on the limit, but it was good, hard stuff. Even the stuff from Max. I mean, that's who he is, right? He's a hard racing driver and it's just his style. And it's just the way it is. Look, I raced against guys that did worse things on the track. Trust me. So I'm okay with it, right? I am okay with it. But in Austria, it's a little different because the track is so different. Like if we go back to like 2019, and I don't know if you remember, but it was either 2 laps from the end. It was a battle between Verstappen and Leclerc for the lead. And Verstappen, I don't want to say forced Leclerc off, but did bump him, right? And that wasn't a penalty. That didn't turn out being, Max didn't get penalized for that. He went on to win the race. But at this particular track, there are so many different instances where you could call a penalty because of the way of the track's nature and the way it's designed. I mean, George doesn't want to run into Sergio Perez, but the way that section of track is, one, it's inviting for another driver to go around the outside. Two, it's tough for the driver who's trying to stick to the racing line but wants to fend off the guy who's trying to go around him, so you carry just a tiny bit more speed and you get that understeer and it's game over. You can't correct it. You can't come back from it. There's nothing you can do. You're a passenger. And the same thing happened with Pierre Gasly. So that's what I mean by how this track is difficult when it comes to the racing. I'll be interested to see how things go as we get further into the season, though. Daily, it'll be it'll be extremely interesting how things get policed. Lewis Hamilton, nice drive, solid.
Back on the podium again. I mean, after what's been a bit of a tough season for Lewis, he gets on the podium 2 weeks in a row. I think that's good for him, because I think people may have been starting to ask some questions about Lewis, because not only was he not getting the results, I mean, he was excuse me, he was not getting the results at the expense of his teammate, but also he was being outqualified by his teammate. So it's good to see. I mean, the incident in qualifying notwithstanding, I mean, it was a solid drive from Lewis, and I just kind of get the feeling that there seems to be a little bit more fire in him in the last 2 or 3 weeks. It just seemed that I don't know if like Lewis is the kind of dude who really gets exasperated or really gets frustrated out in public. I don't think that Lewis is ever going to be kind of like a Fernando Alonso kind of guy who will like literally throw everybody under the bus. Lewis just isn't that kind of guy. I mean, he thanked the team today for the work they did in rebuilding the car and all that good stuff, right? And it's good to see that he, it's starting to come back around for him because it makes the championship a little bit more interesting. And, as Hammy's been saying that, he's got he's not really concerned with he's got no dog in the fight when it comes to like Max winning. He just wants to see somebody else challenge him a little bit because I think I made the comment on our last podcast episode, something to the fact is I think that's why I said that I hope that Lewis comes out, wins this one because, and I said I was aware of the irony of saying that I hope to see Lewis win this one because Max has been running away with the championship the last month or two when that's exactly what Lewis has done since 2014. Yeah. But still, I mean, it was a good drive from him, and Mercedes, I think by and large, they gave him the car today. I think that they were pretty good in their strategies. I thought it was a bit of a gutsy call that they ran him longer at the beginning of the race too.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things for them is just how much damage was done to his car following qualifying. Like there was a lot. They even changed out the survival cell of it. I mean, they were bondoing pieces of the car back together just because they're running low on parts. Like,
oh my goodness.
I mean, that's absolutely incredible. But the thing with Lewis is, and lately I've noticed it, is that now that he's after his third place in Canada, speaking with him then, and then speaking with him again this past Thursday, and comparing that with how he was towards the beginning of the season, you know, there's a huge difference here. And I think it comes from knowing that you're getting close and knowing that the car that you have is going to be able to keep up and is going to be able to battle for podiums and maybe even potentially race wins as you get later on into the season. And I think for Lewis, that's kind of like that. What's the expression I'm looking for? You know, when you dangle a carrot in front of somebody and you're chasing after it, right? And it's kind of like I think for Lewis, it's kind of like I'm going to get that win, and I can see it, and it's right there in front of me, and we're going in the right direction. And for me, I like seeing that. The guy is like one of the greatest drivers ever in Formula One. Statistically, obviously, he's
off
best.
the charts. Yeah.
But that being said, it's times like these where you really see, you know, that championship sort of mentality and the winning nature behind the driver and what they're willing to do or what they're going to do to get back to the front. And I've really enjoyed his story this season. I really have, because you see that, like, you see how hard he's been working. You see that the team and how unified they still are, even though they've had some pretty brutal races daily. But like to see them still stick together and get to where they're going. We have to remember this is a team sport, and it's just I've really enjoyed it, and I think that for this team moving forward, once we get to France, hey, look out, man! I think they're going to have a chance at winning that one.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting too. I completely spaced there. He did get the podium, like you correctly pointed out, in Montreal, but moreover, that's 5 podiums now in the last 6 races for both George and Lewis. George has had 2 P3s at Spain and Azerbaijan, and then Lewis, he's been P3 the last 3 races. And, you know, more to your point that, you know, that they've been through some pretty tough times to start this year, but they're still holding it together, still focused. Man, that must be a pretty great place to work. You know, like obviously there's a lot of pressure to work for a Formula One team, but I'm putting my resume there in tomorrow because they're still focused and still working at it. But, you know, I mean, that's the thing that, and I've made that point for years, that it doesn't matter if this was their first championship or it was number 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it was. It seemed that they always genuinely seemed excited to win a race. It didn't matter if it was Lewis. It didn't matter if it was Nico. It didn't matter if it was Valtteri. They always seemed really stoked and excited that they won a race. But they haven't, like you said, they haven't won it yet this year. But who knows? We got 2 more races before we get to the break here. Hungary's a bit of a lottery because it's like Monaco. I mean, the guy that can kind of get out front has a bit of a good chance to win that one if you got some good tactics. But France coming up here is going to be pretty interesting, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. George Russell obviously having a different rear wing on the back of his car for this race weekend. It was put on there because of the rear wing that he had damaged in qualifying. So for George, just lacking a lot of that straight line speed. Had a car, had a really draggy car, so that that's not great for him in this race, but still a solid job from Russell, man, just to get up to P4 as well in a car that's not really, it's got kind of Frankenstein parts on it, and things are like bondoed together, and it's just like a really great job from both of these drivers. I'll say it again. I've said it a ton on this podcast, but hands down, I think Mercedes has the best driver lineup on the grid.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think that Red Bull's got a pretty good lineup with Max and Checo, obviously, and then also Ferrari's got a good pairing. But I mean, Lewis Hamilton and George. I mean, George impressed me so much what he was able to do at Williams, and obviously that wasn't a great car, but he was able to regularly take that out of Q1 when he shouldn't have. And then obviously that time when he filled in for Lewis in it's like here a couple of years ago. I mean, that was impressive. I mean, he came in obviously as Mercedes reserve driver, but he should have been on the podium that day. I mean, that was just impressive. And I just had a feeling that was just not going to be a flash in the pan. And not to say anything disrespectful about Williams, but I was just like, gotta get this guy in a good car. I want to see what this guy can do in a good car. And I think that we've seen some pretty impressive things from George Russell this year, because like you say, this hasn't been an easy car for them to figure out, hasn't always been an easy car for them to drive. But if you look at the way that they've quietly cobbled together some points, I mean, it's humble by their own very, very high standards. I think that they've got a lot to be maybe not satisfied with, but I think they can take some consolation and a bit of pride that, okay, this is what we've done so far. It hasn't been easy, but look what we've had to work with, and this is what our drivers have done. So I got to tip my hat to them to a certain extent. Couple of things here, Tim, before we get to the tweets and the messages. Though the one thing that I think was a bit of a scary moment, obviously right at the end, was when Carlos's engine went there on lap 58. It wasn't even a big puff of smoke, but just at the end of the straight there, slowed down all of a sudden, a little whiff of smoke. If anything else, he pulled off to the left hand side of that gravel trap at turn 4, went up a bit of a hill there. But the scary thing was that when he tried to park it, the car started rolling back, and you could see like the flames starting to lick out those little louvers on the side of the car. And the marshals took a while to get there to put that one away. And I started to get worried because you saw those flames come out, and all of a sudden they cut to the pit feed. All of a sudden it's like, oh crap, what's going on there? Because we were watching it, and you see this one car pull up, and you see this one marshal. He runs about 5 steps. He takes like the fire extinguisher. He puts it down on the edge of the road, then runs away. I'm like, dude, you got to get that thing another 20 yards over to where that Ferrari is, because that thing's starting to go up in a big way, and Carlos is still trying to get out of it, man. That could have been a lot scarier than it was.
Well, the thing is that for Carlos, where he had put the car, right? I mean, if he gets out and doesn't have something under those wheels stopping the car, I mean, he's going to roll right back out onto the track with a car that's like a flaming ball. Like, what? I mean, for him, and I think that's probably something that the FIA will take a look into of what took the marshals so long to get that fire out, because it wasn't like that Carlos wasn't somewhere where there weren't marshals. There were marshals where he was. So that's definitely something that I think should be looked at for sure, because Carlos hung around in that car, man, while those flames were going off for a while. Like just waiting for the marshals to get there just to stuff something underneath the front tire.
Yeah, and I don't want to be too critical, because I know a lot of these marshals are volunteers and
Absolutely.
and stuff, and they do some great work.
We couldn't go racing without them. We couldn't go racing without them.
Yeah, Tim, 100%. Totally agree with you. Now, this next piece of news is something I really wish we didn't have to talk about, but we should, because it's very important, and it's regarding some behavior and comments that were made by what I hope is a very small amount of people at the Red Bull Ring over the past couple of days. Don't want to call them fans, because I'm sure 99.9999% of Formula One fans would not condone or approve of the things that were said and done. And it's regarding racist and homophobic and other sorts of really horrible behavior and comments that came from certain people in the stands. But as horrible and disappointing as that is to hear in this day and age, I do find encouraging that it was immediately condemned by many, many big names in Formula One who stood up right away and said, look, there's no place for that in our sport. This needs to stop. This just is not on for any reason at any time for any reason. And this included people like Toto Wolff and Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, Charles Leclerc, among others. And I really do find that at least promising. I really hope that they can do something about it. I don't know how you can when you have tens and hundreds of thousands of people there, but I hope the people that they can track them down and take some sort of action against them, because the things that were supposedly said and done, it was homophobic, it was racist, all sorts of those really unpleasant sorts of
misogynistic, homophobic slurs as well, racist slurs as well on top of that. I mean, the list like goes on here with this story, but I think at the end of the day, I mean, Formula One has to do like an investigation into this to see how they can protect fans better. I mean, at the end of the day, like, it's difficult to police for sure, but at the end of the day, you have to find a way, because a Grand Prix is, you're supposed to be there to have fun and to have a good time and enjoy the race. And, you don't have to, people shouldn't have to put up with this. I mean, what happened here in Austria is absolutely disgusting. And seeing some of these stories and hearing some of these stories is absolutely disgusting. And, hearing from Toto Wolff, following the race, he had said, telling these folks to F off, basically, who the small demographic he said is, just to stay home. Don't bother coming to the races. So I think, for Lewis and Lewis had said it best, like it's time for action. You know what? He's right. It is time that they start really doing something about this. So if they can find the individuals who are involved, ban them from motorsports for life. That's it. Long time ban. See you later. Go home. We don't want your money. Have fun. Yeah. And so I think that needs to be done. I know it might be difficult to find these individuals, but at the end of the day, I just really hope that F1 really does do something about this, because these stories were absolutely horrible.
Totally. And
I was just going to say, some of the individuals who were involved, a few of the teams went out and found them and gave them VIP paddock passes. And Mercedes invited them into the garage to watch the race. Aston Martin did as well. The ones that they could find for sure. So it's a very unsettling story, and it's stuff like this that just really just gets my blood boiling, man.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, not only just for that, I mean, all those horrible things. I mean, you listed off even more that I didn't even get to. It just goes to show how bad it was. But I mean, it's supposed to be an inclusive environment. And also I kind of think, well, it should also be like an environment that you should feel comfortable taking your kids to. Because I mean, if you go to take your kids to a game,
100%.
That there's going to be somebody at some point is going to get frustrated and somebody might drop an F-bomb. And, this is kind of like, well, okay, that's not really the greatest thing I want my 7-year-old to hear. But, going to school, they probably hear a lot worse at some point anyways. But this is above and beyond that. And I was glad to see like such a strong reaction from the drivers and some of like the execs like Toto come out and condemn it right away. And to this, this We Races One thing that they've had going for the last couple of years, this would be the perfect way to sort of stand up. But like you say, it might be tough to find out who did it, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't try, right?
100%.
Yeah. Okay. I do want to finish on a one here that I didn't mean to forget about it, but just going back to Mick Schumacher, he was voted driver of the day on Sunday, and by a large margin, 24.5%. Charles, who won the race, was only got 15.5% of the vote. Lewis got 10%. Max got 9.5%. Carlos got 8%. So, I mean, Mick really walked away from it, and I love a bit of the fire. I mean, I think that this is a nice little accolade for him to take away, plus, points in the past couple of races. But I love a little bit of the fire that he had in his belly this weekend too, because he was pretty critical of the team there after the sprint race, saying that they should have moved K-Mag out of the way, because by keeping him in front of himself, that really compromised his own time on the track, his own sprint race on Saturday afternoon. So I kind of like this. I like the fire that I saw from Mick Schumacher, and what we were talking about a little bit earlier. Hopefully, getting these points over the past couple of races, and good qualifying as well. That this is a real step up and a real encouraging point in his career.
Yeah, he's finally really starting to find his feet here at this team and starting to keep pace with K-Mag, which is difficult to do because Magnussen's a really great driver. But at the end of the day, yep. I mean, at this moment, he's doing everything that he should be doing, and that is expected of him. And I think, you got to keep this going. Like, if you're Schumacher, you got to keep this going. You can't sit back, right? You can't sit back. You're going to have upgrades coming in France. So that's going to be another round of new car to learn, and you got to get on top of that fast. And the thing with Mick is sometimes he takes a little bit longer to kind of get up to speed with big upgrades or new cars or new equipment. So for him, there's another big change coming, and he's going to have to jump on top of it. But yeah, that's impressive. 24% for Mick for driver of the day. Wow. Yeah. I mean, wow. I thought like Lewis would have gotten that one because like Hamilton was awesome too. I mean, like, that was surprising when I saw that.
Yeah. And I mean, if Lewis won driver of the day today, I don't think anybody would have raised an eyebrow at that, because like you say, I mean, Lewis had a great drive on Sunday afternoon, but I mean, good for Mick. I mean, I think that should be a nice little confidence booster for him. So let's open up the mailbag here. I know that you've been collecting tweets all afternoon. Why don't we go? How many of these? I was just wondering that. Okay, how many of them are not from Hamilton? Because he wasn't able to do the show tonight, so I'm just wondering how many of the tweets that we have are from Mark Hamilton. But I guess we'll find out.
There is a question here from Ernest T. I'm not quite sure how much we can answer it, but the question is, why has the FIA allowed Red Bull to continue to race cars with illegal floors?
Yeah, that's an interesting one, because we talked about a little bit on Thursday night, just because they have like this, what was a 2 millimeter deflection point, and then I guess what is it? The Red Bull is alleged to sort of what is the flex 6. Up to 6 mil or something like that. I mean, and millimeters is 6 millimeters is not a lot, but I mean, still it's
for
more than double out of. It's quite a bit for a race car, right? But I mean, it's outside what it's supposed to be, but. I don't know. There hasn't been really any news kind of percolating out, but I mean, I guess
not much yet. I think this is just what I think. So, and take it for whatever it's worth, Ernest, is that I think it's just a lot of it's due to not having enough sensors in certain areas of the actual race car itself. I believe, the FIA does do the best that they can to police all of the cars. I usually get like a scrutineering rundown from the FIA following all races. And there's a lot of stuff on there that they check. There is a ton. I can't even go through all of it. There's so much that Joe Bauer has to go through. That being said, moving on, we're definitely going to hear more about this. And it's not just, Red Bull, right? Like, everyone's pointing the finger just at Red Bull. There could be other cars as well that are still doing it as well. And it's one of those things that happens in Formula One. From Sean Huggins. I'm having a hard time with AlphaTauri and particularly Pierre Gasly's form this season. The team seemed to be going on the upward trajectory the last couple of seasons, only to drop off this year, and Pierre is looking very mediocre at the moment. Well,
yeah, I don't really have too
much a question.
I can't really disagree with him too much. I mean, I think that last year, Pierre had a pretty good season. He seemed to be putting that car in places and inserting himself into conversations and situations on the track that he probably shouldn't have. And this year he's been, yeah, it's been disappointing.
Hasn't been that, like, he hasn't been totally like crap, right? Like,
No.
we can't. I understand how, like, fans can get upset about certain drivers not doing well, and then all of a sudden, well, they don't belong there, and all this other kind of stuff. But it's like, at the end of the day, like, you gotta pull it back a minute and take a look at things as a whole, right? Because his season hasn't been, like, horrible. Retirement in Bahrain, that wasn't his fault. Scored points Saudi Arabia, scored points in Australia, had a 12th in Imola, retired in Miami, 13th in Spain, 11th in Monaco. He should have been higher there. 5th in Azerbaijan. And then ever since Canada, it hasn't been great for him.
Mm-hmm.
Something is just not clicking for him in that car just at the moment. And there are other points where, like, he's kind of been there in quali, and it just, something happens to him. So, I think for Pierre, I think he'll get it smoothed out. He's got enough experience. He knows how to get through these difficult times. But yes, I mean, I can understand over the past few races being a bit, frustrated with Pierre Gasly. From Connie Stewart. And thanks for your question, Sean. Appreciate it. Connie Stewart says, do we know what made Vettel so mad? And great racing on tracks the last 2 races. So should there be a limit on the number of street races each year? Oh, that's a great question.
That is a good question. Well, I don't know exactly, like, which instance of, like, Vettel getting mad, because I think there was a couple of them over the course of the weekend. I mean, I think that I don't know if he really got mad, like, over the radio when Pierre punted him off the track. It was something like, well, don't these people know how to drive or something? that was always, like, exasperated frustration. But I think maybe Connie's talking more about, like, the drivers meeting. But I mean, just in general, I mean, like, Seb is a pretty chill kind of guy, but we've seen at times in the past that he tends to see red a little bit out of nowhere. I mean, go back to Azerbaijan, what was it, 2017, behind the safety car? Remember when he thought that Lewis brake tested him, and Lewis didn't brake test him, and he pulled up alongside of him, slammed his car into the side of the Mercedes, and Lewis was like, what the hell is going on here?
Like,
everybody watching. Yeah, then everybody else is going, what the hell is he doing? So, I mean, he does every once in a while just kind of, like, blow a gasket for whatever reason. But, we did kind of answer that a little bit to a certain extent. So was there anything that you wanted to add to that?
No, I think just for Sabbath, it's all about those gray areas with the race directors that's kind of got him particularly, peeved, I guess you would say. But I mean, at the end of the day, it is a little strange to see him go like that, for sure. But yes, obviously, I mean, upset about how things are being run with 2 different race directors, and kind of sounds like the GPDA will be calling for just one moving forward. But I mean, we'll see. Thanks very much for the question, Connie. From Double Waved Yellow, not a question, okay? Just a comment. When will F1 realize letting the sprint result determine the race starting order was a bad idea and ruins the sprint, as no one wants to risk starting the main race at the back? Set the sprint race grid based on Q1 times? Why would you want to set the based on? I kind of see what you're saying, but would it really have changed all that much? Because it really wouldn't have been that big of a change.
Yeah, I think more to the point is that that I think after a year and a bit of the sprint race experiment, I think that it kind of adds something, just not like a lot. It's not really super exciting. It maybe is for a couple of laps, and like, I was really kind of hoping that when it came down to it, that it would be kind of like appointment TV, if you want to call it that, is like, oh boy, they've got a sprint race this weekend. It's like, clear my calendar. I got to sit down and make sure that I watch this one live. I must admit that over the course of the entire weekend, I would say for me, I don't find it as compelling as just the regular qualifying. It's just qualifying. I just don't know how they can improve on the regular qualifying, because we had that bizarre rolling knockoff kind of thing like several years ago, which they KO'd after was it 2 or 3 races, because it just didn't, that rolling cutoff just didn't really work. And then they've gone back to this, this qualifying format that we've had now for 25 years, 30 years, going way back to the early 90s. And yeah, there's probably improvements to be made on it, but it works pretty good. I mean, you lose 5 cars in Q1, you lose 5 cars after Q2, you get the you get the top 10 shootout, and it can be pretty exciting. I still think it works. I still like it. And if somebody says to me, okay, you can only pick one, sprint race or qualifying, which one are you going with? I'm going the current qualifying format, hands down.
Me too.
Yeah.
Me too. Only because I think for myself, I want to see who the fastest driver is on the track, and that's what qualifying determines. Qualifying determines who is the fastest, and it's a different skill set. Like, qualifying is a different skill set from racing. Racing is a different skill set from all of the others. And for me, qualifying is always the hardest. It's extremely difficult. You got to take the car right to the edge. You got to put it there, and can't make a mistake, no matter how small or minute detail it is. So I think for myself, I love qualifying, and I don't ever want to lose it. So
yeah,
that's
totally.
That pretty much does it for questions. Hammy, you had some good ones in there.
Yeah, there were some good ones in there this week for sure. I'm surprised that Mark didn't drop a couple in there. I thought that for sure, because he said he could join us at the last moment tonight, that he would have thrown in there. Maybe he did from his burner account. We just don't know yet. So, but it's all good. But that's all I got tonight, brother. I don't know about you. If there's anything else that you want to add to this one.
That pretty much does it. Does it for me. Does it for us. Thanks everyone for listening. This has been the TSN Racing Pod and the Scuderia F1 Pod mashup. If you want more from the Scuderia F1 Pod, you can get them at Scuderia F1 Pod. If you want more from me, you can get me at Tim Haraney. You can get TSN Racing Pod wherever you get your podcasts as well. You can get the Scuderia F1 Pod wherever you get your podcasts as well. Daily, brother, thanks again for doing this, man. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, always, Tim. Enjoy doing it, and look forward to doing it again soon.